Discussions of women's empowerment usually focus on gains in leadership positions and other positive achievements, but a survey of extremist movements uncovers a dark side of the rising role of women. Should we be surprised to learn that young girls may be as susceptible to the lure of extremist ideology as are young boys? The Wilson Center's Women in Public Service Project and the Middle East program convened a panel to explore these and other questions. That discussion provides the focus for this edition of Rewind.
Today we're going to talk about a darker side of women's empowerment, the real and growing role that women play in extremist groups around the world. We ignore them at our peril. Today, ISIS has an all-female morality brigade that walks the streets of Raqqa, waving firearms while veiled. It's their job to force men and other women to live in the group's medieval fantasy. And we know that many of ISIS's top recruiters are women. Why lift a finger to support groups that want to deny women equality, opportunity, and basic human rights? If we want to counter radicalism, however, we have to crack this puzzle.
How silly are we to be thinking about this issue demographically and to think it's only men that can be influenced? Millennial kids, men and women, girls and boys, are influenced by things in very real ways. And this ideology has corrupted, and we missed, by the way, we, the United States government, were very slow to understand how important it was to understand what was happening with girls. Not surprising. And we're not the only country. So all of a sudden, when you hear, when Jane was talking about the framing of this, it's a shock that a woman is, it's not a shock. It's not a shock at all. Millennial kids are being influenced by what they see, that's girls and boys. So what's happening in the home? It's important to us to understand that young girls in the home and mothers in the home are influencing that next generation of kid. A child's first teacher is a mother. If a mother does not have a way forward with that child to understand not to absorb the us and them narrative, it is very rare that a child will not go down that path.
I think that what we do with women is we always put them in that Madonna or whore dichotomy. It's like either they're victims or they're perpetrators. It's nonsense. It's actually, we have we have women who are deeply victimized, the Yazidi girls, the Nigerians. We have to stop talking about young girls under the age of 10 as suicide bombers, okay? Because a suicide bomber is somebody who chooses to commit suicide. It's a self-choice. Even the women or young girls who are being recruited into ISIS, a lot of them are under the age of 18. There's a lot of sexual grooming that goes on. So there's an overlay of victim and perpetrator that happens, and we saw that in Uganda with the LRA. We've seen that in Sierra Leone. As Tim, we have seen this issue of how women and girls are coerced and used and so forth.
You say now it's amidst a lot of things you don't see it, but if you go back to the history of Islamic thought, the women have always been important when you transit from one caliphate to another. And ISIS is it's extremist.
How do women help you transit from one caliphate?
They are used. They are used
but
because
the Israeli army uses. Interview girls in the Israeli army. They love it. They're being empowered. They feel as if but they're totally being used.
But more than
the same thing.
More than that. Sorry, I interrupted you, Sam. But more than that, if you look at the extremist groups from Al Qaeda, Taliban, and to ISIS, they outsmart each other and they distinguish each other by the way they treat women.
My point here is this. As young kids are navigating through these complex waters, as we know the bad guys are obviously particularly looking at girls and women to lure in, and ISIS, is doing this because they're building a so-called caliphate. You need to have women to do that. To get a 16-year-old girl to believe that she can use her womb as a weapon is pretty profound.
On that point, you used to have a slogan in El Salvador, "Blessed is the womb of the Sandinista." It's an age-old approach, and it can be empowering. It can be, these fighters will die off, but here I am giving life to the next. And so it's all of these narratives that we have to look at. And it's terrorism, and it's something we've been dealing with for quite some time, and we need to make sure that we understand that there are progressions and iterations, but there are success stories.
Data point that struck with me that was profoundly important as we talk about this issue of ideology is that no matter where in the world I went, whether it was a Muslim in a Muslim majority country, or a Muslim living as a minority, whether it was a male or whether it was a female, that young Muslim millennials were dealing with a crisis of identity. And that crisis of belonging and identity speaks definitely to this issue of finding appeal in an ideology that sets up an us and a them. So we have to be more clever, we have to be more advanced, and we have to be very determined in very specific countermeasures to protect young girls and women from the narratives that the bad guys are using to lure them in.
For more on this topic and related issues, visit wilsoncenter.org. Click the Research tab and search under the Global Women's Leadership Initiative and the Middle East Program.